I'm back here with part 2 of NovelWriter. In the very first video that I did for this channel, I introduced the NovelWriter app. In a follow-up video that should be live by the time that you're watching this, I did another video which was something of a spiritual successor, but it wasn't actually about NovelWriter itself. You may have seen it already, and in that other video I talk about some of the flaws of LLM creative writing. LLMs are not bad at creative writing. They've got some very good elements, but then also some flaws, which I go into detail in a previous video, and I talk a little bit about here. And the main reason for mentioning that is that those flaws influence some of my decisions in how to update the app, and I'm going to go into that here. I've called this the age of determinism. I think on reflection that's not really quite right. There is actually still quite a bit of randomness in what I'm doing. However, I've removed the LLM from some parts of the procedure, and that's what I'm going to get into here. So what is NovelWriter? I've told you about this in the first video. Hopefully you've watched that. If you've not, I would suggest going back to watching that. However, I can cover a little bit of what it is here. So it's Python code, and it uses LLMs for text generation. You can use any of the main three providers, and the app will generate text for a number of genres, including science fiction, fantasy, so on and so forth. The outputs will range from 50,000 to 100,000 words for novels. I have also added the ability to write short stories. I think whenever I wrote the slides for this presentation, I hadn't added that ability, but you can now. So anything from a few thousand words all the way up to 100,000 should be doable. You could probably even write more, although I haven't really tested that, if I'm being honest. The code is open source, it's on GitHub, so anyone can download it, and it's free, of course. Here I have a picture of the app as it was a few months ago. The app is still more or less the same. You have a number of tabs within the app, and the tabs, if you count them going from left to right, sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is guiding you through the process of generating your own story. Hopefully now I can show you here the app live. So I haven't really tested this before doing it live, and I'm glad that I was able to jump to the app and it not break or crash or go into the wrong program. Here is just a very quick overview. This is actually an updated version, so I'm showing you the very latest version at the time of recording. There's some new parts over here on the right side, which is about the automation that I've been trying to add, and that's in a new tab. However, ignoring that for now, because I'm going to cover that in the next video. Here, I just want to show you that you actually do have a number of genres, and you can choose even the subgenre, and you can fill in details such as, your name, the name of the novel. You can also ask an LLM to generate you a novel title later, as I hope to show you. So I've picked science fiction, I've picked space opera, and then in the first tab you would generate the lore. So there's factions, there's characters, lore, which is like the actual some of the actual text details, shall we say, the flavor of the lore. I think like things like factions and characters for me are part of the overall lore, the overall universe creation. And then story structure, this is following a template, I should say. Scene planning, so you're planning scenes, and then writing the chapters themselves. So just wanted to jump in quickly with that just to show you how it looks. And I'm going to jump back to the slides to talk to you a little bit more about how the app has changed from the previous version in the first video to this version. So as I mentioned, one of the things that guided my decision making in updating the app was the problems that I faced, such as repetitive structure, repetitive metaphors, limited variety in name generation, and also recurring thematic ideas. So if you see something like the sun being mentioned, the sun coming up, or twin suns coming up, you will find that that actually comes up quite a lot in your generated text. And so that kind of shows you that there's this repetition of ideas that comes up a lot. Now, each generation, if you think from book to book, should be completely independent. An LLM doesn't have memory between each call that you make to it. You have to essentially put the memory for the LLM into your own code. And that's something that I do, but in testing, you can actually test without the memory to see what happens, and you can see that LLMs have fairly limited randomness, and that's why they were bad for generating names. The themes, as I've said, metaphors were overused, and the structure was also a bit too repetitive. Each of these, I think, are fairly solvable. I'm not going to say perfectly so, but I think we can certainly do better than what I was doing the first time round. Further down, I mentioned two other ones which are a little bit harder to solve. LLM laziness is basically the LLM doesn't always follow your prompt. It doesn't always want to. It'll pick certain parts of your prompt that it focuses on and then ignore other parts altogether. Choosing a better model, a smarter model, it helps. So choosing, say, the very latest version of GPT versus an older version makes sense, and also picking a thinking version versus a non-thinking version can also help. But I don't want to say that that will perfectly fix it. That also means that you have to incur higher costs. So I'm not immediately saying that that's going to be the best solution, but it might be. It really might be. And then lastly is this difficulty to maintain coherency across a large text. Part of that is about the context window, but part of it's also about the dare I say, the smartness of the LLMs. And I think also some of it is about the architecting of the app itself. So I want to say that the first 4 points I've made some headway to try and solve. The latter two, I did a little bit on coherency, and that's really getting into the weeds of how I'm working with prompts and how I chain them together, but I don't think I've really got the scope to go into that in this video. So let me just show you the part that I really wanted to show in this video in terms of updates. So previously what I was doing, I was getting the LLM to generate everything. So all of the names, the entirety of the plot. It followed a template, but I asked it to write the content of the plot, and then to write the prose itself. So that's like the actual text of the story. And you do that through various prompts, and that's what each of the buttons were inside the app. Now, in the latest version, and it's still true now, is that I actually generate the background universe locally. So I don't make any LLM calls to generate things like faction names, character names, planet names, and technology. The list of technology coming from an LLM was also very repetitive, as it was with names. I generate my own list of technology from code that I have. I don't want to say that it's perfect. It's not, and the same with any of this. None of it is like perfect, but I think it's definitely an improvement from what was before, and I think that's one of the key things to take away. There's always things that you can do to make it better than what it has been. So let's get on to the actual kind of structure of the code and the procedure that it follows. So the top part here, I've got collect parameters. So that's kind of what I showed you in the very first tab of the app. I guess I can jump back to here and show you some of the parameters. Things like you might have a title. You're going to have like your sci-fi and space opera. So you're making some of these real fundamental choices at the beginning. Then you generate the background lore and the specific lore. And that's the part in the old version in the red box that used to be done by an LLM, whereas now I'm doing it locally, and that means that I think I'm seeing greater variety in what I'm doing locally than what I did before. And it's really about these problems that I highlighted in the previous slide that I'm trying to address those. And I think that I am. The green box is about generating the arc, so it's the outline of the story, the plot, rather than the actual text itself. And while I have some templates that are being followed for the overall structure, it's the LLM that's writing the text within the template. So if you have, say, like a 6-act structure or a 3-act structure or whatever, that's kind of like a very high level meta structure. However, your actual characters need to be placed into that structure, such as your hero will make some sacrifice, your hero will go from planet A to planet B, your hero will be assisted by whoever, some supporting character. Each of these things need to be woven into the structure itself in order to fill it out, and that's what the LLM is doing, or it's one of the things that the LLM is doing, and it's through a series of calls that happens, and that's what each of the buttons were in the app that I was just showing you. If I jump very quickly back to the app, I can show you the lore page. So this is all locally, the lore, the structure, and this is all LLM. So you would click each of these in turn in order to generate, say, like the character arcs, the faction arcs, adding locations back into the arcs. That was a strange LLM artifact whenever LLMs are lazy. It was one of the sort of prime examples of an LLM just ignoring the fact that each location already had a name, had been assigned to it. It had been told about this in a previous prompt, but just decided to ignore it. But besides the point. And then lastly is to actually write the text of the story, which is the blue box. And so that's like once you've got all of your characters, all of your factions, you've got everything basically written out at a high level, you actually want to then write the story scene by scene. And that's what that last box is. And that's where the majority of the time is spent with the LLM, basically. And I'm not doing any of that locally on my machine, as you'd expect. So let's have a little bit of a closer look at the faction generator. I'm not going to show you that in operation. I haven't really rehearsed that, and I probably wouldn't do a very good job sort of semi-live. What I will say is the faction generator dumps out this JSON file, which is what you see in the black box there. It gives you a name for the faction, gives you a style such as militaristic. It could be, it's like a merchant guild or whatever. You then need to generate solar systems, and each of those solar systems will have stars, and so an empire may have several solar systems, and each of those solar systems may have several planets, and those planets should have names and they should have governors. And so that's what the faction generator does, and it gives them sort of kind of random names, but it does follow rules. It's not completely random. The key characters, which I'm kind of hinting at, such as like a governor, and then the leader of a faction, and so on, and then a last one which is military strength. So it's like a procedural generation algorithm for generating like a fleet of ships that'll be within that faction. So faction 1 might have 100 ships, and faction 2 might have 1,000 ships, or whatever. I actually don't remember off the top of my head. However, what I wanted to do was just to give you an idea that the output is very structured, and that each of the sort of items in here is all created locally following an algorithm. It's procedural generation and has a sprinkling of randomness within it. And so none of this is from an LLM. However, parts of this information from this is sent to an LLM in order to get it to generate, say, the arc, the story of what's going to happen. Some of these details I probably would like to go into, but I think the video would end up being much longer than it should be, and I think it's a case of if someone was really interested, maybe they could take the app, download it, run it. It's just Python. There's nothing magic or special that you have to do. It should run fairly easily. I think maybe there's some dependencies you need to install, so maybe there is a little bit more to it than I'm saying. However, it shouldn't be particularly hard. You can download it, run it, and then maybe you can see how it works. Then the next part is the character generator. Again, I don't know if this is interesting. Hopefully it is for some people. Things like you would want from a character, like name and age, and you have some rules about, okay, your main character should be of a particular age. They shouldn't be too young, they shouldn't be too old. You have to have the main character live on one of the planets which already exists. I don't want the planet to be completely new. I don't want them to be outside of a faction that doesn't exist. So there are a few rules that are in the app. Whenever it comes to generating characters, it's dependent upon the factions, so you generate the factions first. Things like the role, it's like whether they're, in this case, they're a protagonist, that's your main character. It's not the role in terms of like their profession, like are they a military officer or whatever. I think that is in the app, however. I'm not going to go into that here because there's a chance that I may not be doing it correctly as I'm looking at background and I see that it's empty. It probably shouldn't be. However, flaws of the character, strengths of the character. This is also kind of templates that I have, or not templates, but a list or lists of flaws, lists of strengths, lists of motivations, and then you randomly select under some certain rules to then populate those fields. Yep, I know some of you may be thinking that it's not perfect, and it isn't, but it is actually better than what I was getting with LLMs. Again, because, as I've said before, LLMs have limited randomness. And then lastly, what's worth mentioning is family members. So you generate a few more names, and it can be a mum and a dad and a brother and sister or whatever, and there are some rules as to whether they are still alive or retired, whether there's many siblings or not, and just to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. And again, each of these details can affect the story, because the characters can appear in the backstory of your main character, and they can also appear in the actual main story that you're writing. So the mother and the father can appear as a supporting character, and going through these procedures is that you can generate, in theory, an unlimited number of characters, which is much better than what an LLM would do. And the LLM would even struggle to juggle all of the different names that you've created before. And that was, again, one of the big problems that I had. It would generate, say, a name in one response, and then in a later response, it could change the name. And that's obviously a problem for coherency. You want to have the same name basically throughout. You don't want your characters to change names. And while your main character may never change name, like the name of the mother or the name of the father of your main character could change from prompt to prompt. And that was problematic. And that was, again, a big motivator as to why I went this route. I think that's me covered pretty much everything that I wanted to in this video. There will be another video coming sometime in the future, hopefully not too far, where I will cover some of the automation. Basically, I'll be covering some of the things I did in order to add some automation to the app. I would say that isn't entirely perfect. Again, like everything that I'm doing, not entirely perfect. And there were some interesting headaches whenever I added in the automation code. But again, I think I'm going to leave that for another video. But hopefully you found this one interesting, and hopefully it will, hopefully this will be informative for some people, and it will give an idea as to why we shouldn't be using an LLM for generating everything, especially things like names and whatever else. And I suspect that it's probably also true for images, that if you want to generate images on the fly for an app, for a game or whatever, I have some fears that it will be overly similar across multiple outputs. which means that if there's two separate apps created by separate people, two separate games created by separate people, separate companies, then the artwork could end up being very similar, and that would be potentially problematic. Okay, thanks for watching, and if you like and subscribe, that will help me out. Thank you very much.